Welcome to episode 3 of the Ulysses Unlocked podcast, where we analyze Ulysses by James Joyce one page at a time. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. And now for a deep dive today, we're taking on, a truly monumental work, James Joyce's Ulysses. You've given us some incredibly rich source material focusing on the very early pages, the Telemachus chapter. And our mission really is to unlock some of its most intriguing and, let's be honest, often elusive details. We're going to dive deep into Stephen Dedalus's complex character, trying to unravel how he's shaped by his most intimate internal thoughts and the often abrasive observations of others, particularly Buck Mulligan. Prepare to explore how Joyce uses these seemingly small, even trivial details to build just profound layers of meaning that, resonate throughout the entire novel. Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it, how early in the text Joyce just immediately plunges us into the psychological landscape of his characters. These initial interactions and Stephen's internal monologues, they aren't just opening scenes, they really lay critical groundwork. They shape our fundamental understanding of Stephen's motivations, the sort of intellectual burdens he carries, and those deep emotional scars that, define him. We get that Ulysses can feel like, a daunting Everest of literature for many people. But our deep dive today is designed to give you some clear shortcuts, really illuminating the genius behind Joyce's meticulous prose and the deeply human, universal story at its core. You walk away, hopefully, with a much richer appreciation for every single word, seeing how Joyce meticulously crafts a world and a mind in just extraordinary detail.
Absolutely. And to truly get inside Stephen's mind, to, really understand the intricate workings of his consciousness, we have to start with one of the most haunting and deeply personal memories that plagues him. We enter Stephen's thoughts directly on page 5 of Ulysses, right after Mulligan's taunts have set this, somewhat unsettling tone. This is where we encounter the profound, almost visceral memory of his dead mother. And Joyce, with his unparalleled poetic precision, paints this picture with such stark, unforgettable imagery, doesn't he? Silently, in a dream, she had come to him after her death, her wasted body within its loose brown grave clothes giving off an odor of wax and rosewood, her breath that had bent upon him, mute, reproachful, a faint odor of wetted ashes. It's just an incredibly powerful, almost suffocating moment, right? It's just pages into the novel. And it immediately tells you so much about the character's internal landscape. It's not just a description. It feels like an immediate immersion into his grief.
It really does.
Yeah.
And what's particularly striking here is that this isn't just a fleeting, a throwaway thought for Stephen. It's a foundational memory, absolutely central to his psychological state and, I argue, his artistic identity. It shapes his entire internal world, influencing his interactions, his worldview, even his ability to connect with others throughout the day. And Joyce's meticulous crafting of this specific sentence really underscores its profound importance. We know, actually, that this evocative description of his mother originated in a 1908 notebook, years before Ulysses was finished. And Joyce didn't just use it once. He reworked it twice within the Telemachus chapter itself,
Yeah.
which, that speaks volumes about its centrality.
Twice. Wow, that's an astonishing level of dedication to just a single phrase. For a writer to, return to something so fundamental and refine it repeatedly, it just suggests a profound significance. What kind of changes did he make, and what do those revisions tell us?
Well, the subtle changes, they really reveal so much about Joyce's artistic process. It's almost mirroring Stephen's own calling as a poet, this relentless, almost obsessive search for the ideal shape and order of words, believing that the smallest shift can unlock a whole universe of feeling. In the very first revision within Telemachus, he strategically brings silently right to the beginning of the sentence, pulls it forward for added emphasis, and that immediately sets a tone of quiet internal suffering. He also swaps in the more vivid, almost archaic word grave clothes for the more common habit, makes the imagery far more concrete, more unsettling, evokes a sense of ancient ritual and decay. And crucially, he sharpens the sense of guilt, adding that detail about his mother's breath, describing it as mute, reproachful, really enforces that guilt.
So he's not just picking new words, he's meticulously rearranging, adjusting, fine-tuning the rhythm and the emotional impact of every single syllable, every nuance. That's truly incredible.
Precisely. And in the second passage, he keeps playing with word order. He moves in a dream to the front, altering the temporal emphasis slightly. He takes out the adjective brown from brown grave clothes, which maybe allows the image to become more universal, more spectral perhaps. And he also subtly tones down the overt reproachfulness of the breath. Instead, he describes it as bent over him with mute secret words. End quote. Now that shift is fascinating, isn't it? It suggests a more internalized sort of unspoken accusation. A guilt Stephen himself projects, rather than one explicitly delivered by her. Both revisions also decide that the odor of the wasted body itself isn't faint, unlike her breath, and they make a subtle but important linguistic shift. The body isn't giving out an odor, it's giving off an odor, which implies a more natural, sort of inescapable emanation. And instead of joining her breath with "and," he opts for a comma, creating a slightly different pause, a different rhythm. This kind of searching for an ideal shape within a mass of words, this rigorous pursuit of perfect expression, is absolutely characteristic of Stephen's calling as a poet, right? His intellectual quest. And it also typifies Joyce's practice as a prose stylist. It's famously manifested in the Lestrygonians chapter, where, you know the story, he supposedly devoted an entire day's labor to just 2 sentences. Not looking for different words, but for the exact right order of the words. It's a testament to his belief in the almost, well, sacred power of language, a belief Stephen himself cherishes deeply.
And those specific scents and textures, wax and rosewood and wetted ashes, they're so potent, they just hit you, don't they? What do these specific, almost archaic smells and textures convey about death, preservation, and decay? What's Joyce doing there?
They're incredibly evocative, yeah, and loaded with cultural significance. Wax immediately brings to mind, well, funerary preservation, doesn't it? The embalming process, maybe the candles burned at a wake, something that tries desperately to hold off decay, to preserve a memory, yet ultimately points to the inevitability of dissolution. It suggests a sterile, almost artificial attempt to halt what is natural. Rosewood suggests something precious, perhaps the elegant wood of a coffin or fine furniture. It links the mother's body to domesticity, to a past life of maybe comfort and refinement, now utterly steeped in the scent of death and its materials. Its beauty intertwined with finality. And wetted ashes, I mean, that's just brilliant in its economy. It's a residue of what was once vibrant and alive, now extinguished, damp maybe with tears or just the coldness of death. It conveys decay, finality, and a lingering, suffocating presence of loss. A chilling dampness. These aren't just smells. They're sensations, textures, deep emotional trailers that communicate Stephen's profound internal suffering with incredible efficiency. It really is the scent of guilt, memory, and the inescapable past.
Wow. And this isn't the last time we encounter these specific phrases, is it? Joyce, he has this way of weaving motifs throughout the fabric of the novel.
Well, far from it. No, this recurring motif is absolutely typical of Ulysses' intricate structure. Once a phrase gains a foothold in the text, it might return at any time, pulling readers' thoughts right back to the complex of associations it first evoked. It builds layers and layers of meaning. The wax and rosewood passage, after its 2 really poignant appearances here in Telemachus, it returns again in Nestor, slightly altered. An odor of rosewood and wetted ashes, but unmistakably the same haunting memory. And then it reappears in Proteus as a ghost woman with ashes on her breath. The imagery becomes even more spectral, more distilled. This technique, it's not just a stylistic flourish. It profoundly foreshadows what happens in the epic Circe chapter, which for many readers becomes this incredible exercise in recalling the entire book through hundreds of recurring phrases and associations. It amplifies the significance of these initial foundational details. It's like a complex musical leitmotif, signaling deep psychological connections and the enduring power of memory across time and space within the novel. It demonstrates how Stephen is literally haunted by his past.
So, given this intense internal monologue, this really deep dive into his subconscious, what does this all mean for us as readers, getting this information so early in the book? How does it serve as a key to Stephen's character?
Well, it shows us, I think, unequivocally how profoundly Stephen is haunted, how personal grief intertwines inextricably with his artistic and intellectual struggles. This profound guilt and sorrow for his mother's death are really a key to understanding his aloofness, his seriousness, his intellectual arrogance sometimes, and his general detachment from the world around him. His entire being, his poetic impulse, his critical stance, they're all colored and informed by this indelible memory. It establishes Stephen as a character defined by internal conflict, trapped by his past, and struggling to forge an independent identity under the shadow of profound loss.
It also brilliantly demonstrates why Ulysses is considered so revolutionary, doesn't it? This intense internal monologue, this direct, unfiltered access to a character's subconscious mind. That's what makes the book so unique and compelling. It invites you, the reader, inside Stephen's mind in a way a few books had ever done before. It makes you a direct, intimate participant in his innermost world right from page 1. You're not just observing his grief from a distance. You're, experiencing its suffocating presence, its lingering scent, its demanding accusation right alongside him.
Exactly. It fundamentally alters the relationship between a reader and character, pulls you right into his psyche.
Okay, so from Stephen's internal turmoil, that heavy weight of memory and guilt, We then seamlessly move to a seemingly simple, yet profoundly symbolic external detail. Again, Joyce imbues this with immense meaning. Mulligan, ever the provocateur, right? Always trying to chip away at Stephen's perpetually serious, almost funereal mood. He offers Stephen some new trousers, describing them with characteristic flippancy as a lovely pair with a hair stripe, gray. But Stephen's refusal is just blunt, almost rigid in its declaration. I can't wear them if they're gray. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. This seemingly trivial detail about a choice of trousers opens up an entire world of meaning about Stephen's character, his social position, his psychological burdens.
It absolutely does. And it's a masterclass in how Joyce uses these surface details to reveal profound depth. Stephen's rigid refusal of the gray pants immediately reveals his strict adherence to, well, outdated Victorian mourning conventions. His somber black clothes are not just a fashion choice, they are a profound symbolic manifestation of his guilt and ongoing grief for his mother, a visible testament to his internal state. Gifford, the renowned annotator of Ulysses, provides crucial context here. He notes that in the mid-Victorian world, the period of a son's deep mourning for his mother, which strictly entailed a black suit, black shoes, black socks, black tie, plus a sharply limited social life, would typically have lasted a year and a day. Now, by 1904, the year the novel is set, these rules had been considerably relaxed, but Stephen is still adhering to the letter of the old law, almost defiantly.
A year and a day. It's a very specific, almost ritualistic time frame. But if the rules had relaxed, why is Stephen so unyielding? Why stick to it so rigidly?
It's a compelling question, isn't it? And Joyce is incredibly precise with his chronology, which makes this detail even more poignant. We learn later in the Ethica chapter that Stephen's mother was buried on June 26, 1903. The current date in Ulysses, Bloom's Day, is June 16, 1904. This means there were only a mere 10 days remaining until he would officially be allowed to enter what the Victorians called half-mourning, which would then permit him to wear gray clothes, or at least clothes with gray elements.
Only 10 days.
Wow. Exactly. So Stephen's refusal isn't just about a color, it's about a deep personal commitment to his grief, an almost self-imposed penance that extends right up to, and perhaps beyond, its conventional societal expiration date. It suggests his grief isn't just a societal obligation for him, but a deeply personal, almost artistic statement of his identity. He chooses to remain in this state of visible sorrow.
That's a fascinating detail, how close he is to the end of that traditional period, yet he won't budge. It paints him as someone both deeply traditional and, in a way, deeply rebellious. And you mentioned a Shakespearean parallel here, too, which adds another layer of literary weight.
Yes, definitely. To this realistic social and psychological context, Joyce adds a really powerful symbolic parallel to, well, one of the most important literary texts in English, Shakespeare's Hamlet. Stephen's somber black clothes immediately make him a type of Hamlet, right?
Yeah.
A solitary intellectual figure rejecting his world's expectations. Hamlet, famously, also insists on dressing in formal mourning attire, his knighted color, while others in his world, particularly his mother Gertrude and his uncle Claudius, are urging him to move on with life and cast tie knighted color off. They view his continued mourning as excessive, a disruption to the new order.
Right.
This stark contrast is further emphasized later in Telemachus between Stephen's mourning clothes and the gay attires of Mulligan and Haynes. They're clad in brighter, more carefree fabrics, literally embodying a more modern, less burdened approach to life. Hamlet, too, first appears in that scene of high court ceremony where everyone else is dressed festively to celebrate a marriage and dynastic stability. It highlights his profound isolation and alienation from the celebratory mood. Stephen mirrors this perfectly.
And Mulligan, in his typical, often cruel style, picks up on this parallel, doesn't he? He's always quick with a cutting remark.
Absolutely. Mulligan's mocking rebuke directly allies him with Gertrude and Claudius in their impatience for Hamlet to move on from what they see as excessive grief. He tells his face in the mirror, he can't wear them, Buck Mulligan told his face in the mirror. Etiquette is etiquette. He kills his mother, but he can't wear gray trousers.
Mm-hmm. That caustic comment deepens the Hamlet parallel significantly. It positions Mulligan as part of the establishment Stephen rejects, pushing him to conform, to shed his grief. But the line, he kills his mother, that's particularly vicious, isn't it? It's a gross mischaracterization. An inversion of Stephen's actual guilt over not kneeling at her deathbed. It transforms his grief into an accusation of, well, parricide almost, a common trope sometimes associated with Hamlet interpretations. It just underscores Mulligan's role as a tormentor, exacerbating Stephen's deep-seated guilt. It's subtle, but incredibly powerful. Connecting Stephen to such a significant literary archetype immediately gives him this tragic intellectual weight. But it's not just Stephen who adheres to these mourning customs in the book, is it? There's another character, equally significant, who will also be dressed in black on this very day.
That's right. And it's a brilliant stroke by Joyce to create this subtle but crucial thematic link. If we connect this to the bigger picture, even Leopold Bloom, the novel's other protagonist, will be dressed in black later that day for Patty Dignam's funeral. As Bloom walks down the sunny side of the street in Calypso, he explicitly thinks about his attire. Be a warm day, I fancy. Especially in these black clothes, feel it more. But I couldn't go in that light suit. Make a picnic of it.
Right.
So his scrupulous adherence to the customs of mourning, even when it causes him physical discomfort on a warm day, subtly but powerfully associates him with Stephen. While Stephen's mourning is deeply internal and guilt-driven, Bloom's, while respectful, seems more outwardly pragmatic maybe. He chooses the black suit to avoid making a picnic of it at a funeral, respecting social decorum. Yet despite their different motivations, the visual impact is the same. Two men, dressed in black, walking through a vibrant, sunny Dublin, visually set apart from the general populace.
Yeah.
This shared uniform of grief, this physical resemblance, immediately suggests a deeper, almost fated connection between them. It hints at their shared outsider status and the powerful, though unacknowledged, father-son dynamic that will unfold throughout the novel. It's a silent visual foreshadowing, brilliantly executed, that tells us more about their potential connection than any direct dialogue could at this early stage.
So Stephen's refusal of the gray pants is far more than just being stubborn about his clothes. It shows us how deeply societal conventions, profound personal grief, and even classic literary archetypes like Hamlet are all meticulously woven into Stephen's very appearance, his public persona. It really makes you reflect on the silent language of our own choices. What might your clothing choices subtly say about your inner state or your social role to the world, even if you're not consciously aware of it? Perhaps you've chosen a certain color today that reflects your mood or a style that aligns with a group you belong to, all without consciously considering its deeper message. It makes you think twice about what we wear and what it reveals. Okay, we focused a lot on Stephen, digging into his intricate inner world and analyzing the outward presentation of his grief. But his complex character is also profoundly shaped by how others perceive him, especially the charismatic, often infuriating, and, well, undeniably influential Buck Mulligan. Mulligan's initial description of Stephen, right there in the opening pages of Telemachus, sets a very specific, almost theatrical tone. A lovely mummer, the loveliest mummer of them all. It's a bold declaration about a character we've just learned is consumed by guilt and intellectual seriousness. So, okay, let's unpack this. What exactly is a mummer, and why on earth would Mulligan apply such a term to the intensely serious, guilt-ridden Stephen Dedalus? It seems like a complete contradiction.
It's a loaded term indeed. And surprisingly, many annotators and scholars have been, well, curiously reluctant to fully gloss mummer, often just equating it with actor. But the sources suggest there's so much more to it. That simple definition misses layers of specific cultural and historical meaning. When Mulligan calls Stephen a mummer, it's far more loaded than just actor. Scholars note it immediately conjures images of impromptu street performers, often with comic, even bawdy, routines involving masks, outlandish costumes, maybe begging for handouts. There's even a historical link to a more derogatory term for an actor, suggesting a theatricality that might be seen as less artistic and more crude, perhaps. Some scholars even suggest a subtle homoerotic undercurrent to Mulligan's particular usage, adding layers of mischief and flirtation to his taunt. But to truly appreciate the sting, and maybe the predictive power of this label, we need to understand the historical tradition of mumming itself.
Okay, so what was a mumming show then? Paint a picture for us of what that would have looked like in Joyce's time.
Right. Mummers were, and in some rural parts of the British Isles still are, impromptu comic actors. They weren't the polished performers of, say, the Abbey Theatre. They'd perform in the streets and inns and public houses, even visit private homes, much like carolers or trick-or-treaters do today, especially around holidays like Christmas or Easter. Their performances typically revolved around a very specific, highly ritualized story, the death and resurrection of a young hero. He's killed, often in a comic struggle, and then miraculously revived by a quack doctor or some magical figure.
Ah, interesting.
Begging for handouts from their audience was often involved, and masking also played a crucial part. The cognates of mummer in various medieval languages actually carry the principal meaning of wearing a mask or disguise, literally transforming the performer. These comic, often boisterous performances were still going strong in the British Isles in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. So it's a very familiar tradition to Joyce and his contemporaries. They were a raw, popular form of entertainment, often satirical and irreverent.
So it's not just a generic actor, it's a specific kind of folk performer, often associated with a certain kind of earthy, unpolished humor. And you mentioned there's a direct connection to Joyce's own world, perhaps even a satirical jab.
Absolutely. Adding to these historical and definitional layers, scholars like Sloat, Mamegonian, and Turner note the fascinating fact that, according to Oliver St. John Gogarty's memoir, Many Lines to Thee, Mummers was Joyce's name for Yeats players in the Irish National Theatre.
Oh, really?
Yeah. This adds a fascinating layer of literary politics and Irish cultural context. Joyce was using the term not just generally, but with a specific, perhaps even slightly sardonic jab at the formal, somewhat earnest theatrical world of the Irish literary revival. A movement striving to define a new Irish national identity through its arts, often with a very serious, high-minded tone that Joyce and, well, Mulligan found ripe for satire. So calling Stephen a mummer could be Mulligan's way of both insulting Stephen by associating him with crude folk art and simultaneously linking him, ironically, to the serious, often self-important artists of the literary establishment. It's quite clever, actually.
That makes Mulligan calling Stephen the loveliest mummer even more complex, given Mulligan's own boisterous personality and penchant for dramatic antics. He seems to embody the spirit of mummery himself.
Exactly. Mulligan himself feels a strong affinity for these impromptu clowners and the spirit of irreverent performance. In the Scylla and Charybdis chapter, he declares with characteristic theatricality that he has conceived a play for the mummers. Great. And he immediately launches into reciting the very funny, lewd title page of a skit he's imagined. The spirit of mummery absolutely informs his own behavior throughout the novel. His impromptu comic skits, his blasphemous mockery of priestly rites by turning them into a shaving ritual, his pretending to be a dildo in an absurd monologue, his taking on the persona of Jesus Christ on the tower, or speaking as a professor of Celtic antiquities, or even founding that fantastical fertilizing farm for barren females.
Right.
He's the ultimate exuberant, shape-shifting mummer, constantly performing and satirizing.
But Stephen is so painfully serious for most of the book, as our sources point out. His humor, when it appears, is typically wry and ironic. Why call him a mummer? It seems like a profound paradox, almost a mischaracterization at this point.
It does seem paradoxical, doesn't it? For the majority of Ulysses, especially in these early chapters, Stephen is indeed painfully serious, burdened by his intellect, his grief, his guilt. Even that wry telegram he sends, which makes Mulligan call him peerless, shows little genius for comic improvisatory clowning. His humor is typically wry, intellectual, ironic, hardly the broad physical comedy you'd expect from a mummer trying to please a street crowd. However, Joyce, with his incredible foresight, is playing a longer game here. Mulligan's prophetic, playful taunt anticipates a future transformation. With the onset of drunkenness and the chaotic energy in later chapters, particularly Oxen of the Sun, Stephen does begin to loosen up. He becomes funnier. He starts to tap into the same comic veins that Mulligan enjoys. Blasphemous mockery of religion, crude celebrations of carnality, using language in a more uninhibited, performative way.
Okay. So Mulligan is almost a prophetic voice, unwittingly anticipating Stephen's later, more unhinged transformation. He's seeing something in Stephen that Stephen himself hasn't quite embraced yet.
Precisely. The Circe chapter, that sprawling, nightmarish Nighttown episode, provides a much clearer, more vivid example of Stephen in full mummer's mode. After some lewd jokes and Lynch saying, "Let him alone, he's back from Paris," and Zoe urging, "Oh, go on, give us some parlez-vous," Stephen claps his hat on his head, leaps over to the fireplace, and performs this hilarious, uninhibited imitation of a Parisian hawker enticing passers-by to enter an establishment and see a sex show.
Right. I remember that scene.
This body theatrical performance may not directly correspond to any dialogue ever heard in a traditional holiday mummer's play, but it absolutely displays Stephen in the mummer's mode of comic improvisation, a total departure from his usual detached intellectualism. He's embracing the performative and the vulgar. It's him stepping onto the stage, albeit a very crude one.
And the central death and resurrection theme of mummery plays out for Stephen, too, in a very dramatic way, echoing the core narrative of those folk plays.
Intriguingly, yes. Circe reaches its chaotic, hallucinatory climax in a series of events that directly reproduce the central action of many mummers' plays, the death and symbolic resurrection of the hero. Stephen, after confronting a British soldier in a drunken rage, gets knocked flat on his back, as chaotic action swirls over his prostrate body who appears. Corny Kelleher, the funeral home worker, complete with weepers round his hat, a death wreath in his hand. He appears among the bystanders and offers, with chilling professional courtesy, to transport Stephen on the cart in which he has just ferried 2 lechers to Nighttown. This is a direct echo of the quack doctor arriving to tend to the fallen hero in the play. But here's the crucial difference. It appears finally that his assistance will be unnecessary. Stephen, through Bloom's intervention and his own resilience, then escapes the fate of being ferried to Glasnevin Cemetery by Corny, a fate that Paddy Dignam suffered just that morning, June 16th. If Joyce was intimately familiar with the tradition of mumming, it's hard to imagine he wouldn't have deliberately made this symbolic connection to what happens to Stephen. It's a literal manifestation of the mummer's play, with Stephen as the hero who dies and is resurrected, avoiding the finality of death and re-entering the world.
And there's even a beautiful, almost poetic connection to Stephen's very name, tying him into this ancient tradition.
Yes. Frances Jeanette Fitch, in her doctoral dissertation, notes this lovely synchronicity. December 26th, the most common day for mummery in Ireland, is not called Boxing Day there, but St. Stephen's Day, which adds a beautiful symbolic layer to Stephen's very name, suggesting he is intrinsically linked to this tradition of folk performance, transformation, and symbolic rebirth. This raises an important question for us to consider, doesn't it? How does Mulligan, with his playful, often cutting, and at times surprisingly prophetic air, actually contribute to Stephen's unfolding narrative, and his eventual embracing of this improvisatory, comedic, and performative side, even if it's a journey Stephen is reluctant to take? Mulligan, in a way, might be forcing Stephen towards his own destiny, nudging him towards a different kind of artistic expression.
That's a huge question, and it speaks to the complexity of their relationship. Definitely something to think about. And speaking of names, Mulligan himself mocks Stephen's absurd name in ancient Greek, but then admits his own Malachi Mulligan, 2 dactyls, is absurd too. But like everything in Ulysses, especially names, Mulligan's name is far from simple or accidental. It's packed with layers of meaning, isn't it?
Oh, indeed. The resonances in his name might not be quite as numerous or convoluted as those of Stephen Dedalus, but they evocatively summon ancient Irish leaders, an ancient Hebrew prophet, and even Greek epic poetry, with Roman mythology folded in later. Mulligan's comment about 2 dactyls immediately confirms the typical Irish pronunciation of his first name, M-L-O-K, which rhymes rhythmically with his last name, Mulligan. Just as Oliver rhymes with Gogarty, who of course was the real-life inspiration for Mulligan. It's a playful nod to the musicality of names.
And dactyls also instantly connect to the Odyssey, don't they? Foreshadowing the epic journey we're about to embark on.
They absolutely do. The dactyls insinuate one more crucial hint, that Joyce's monumental novel is somehow retelling or reinterpreting the story of the Odyssey. Because Homer's long poem was famously composed in dactylic hexameter, rhythmic lines of 6 long, short beats. You could almost hear the D-U-H, do-do rhythm, like a strong, driving heartbeat. It's entirely possible that Joyce is subtly inviting his readers to listen for these dactylic rhythms as they read his first chapter, just as he asks them to hear the Catholic introito being chanted and countless musical tunes throughout the book. It's another layer of sonic richness and classical allusion, hinting at the epic scope underlying the mundane details of a single day in Dublin.
So it's a sound, a literary echo to ancient Greece. And then there's the much deeper, almost spiritual meaning behind the name Malachi itself.
Absolutely. Malachi is a common anglicized form of MacLachlan, an ancient Irish name borne by a high king and by one of St. Patrick's companions, grounding it firmly in Irish history. But the relative rareness of the name in Ireland, the highly unusual I spelling, Malachi instead of Malachi, and Mulligan's own self-aware comments all point toward a more symbolic and biblical meaning. In Hebrew, Malachi, the last of the 12 minor prophets in the Old Testament, literally means my messenger.
Ah, okay, my messenger.
Indeed. Some biblical scholars have even argued that it wasn't a man's proper name at all, but a symbolic one, indicating the prophet's function as a messenger of God, a divinely appointed herald. And Mulligan is clearly aware of this biblical significance, and he revels in it. In Scylla in Charybdis, he borrows a scrap of paper to jot down an idea for a play and quips, "May I," he said, "the Lord has spoken to Malachi." He knows he's a messenger, or at least likes to think of himself as one, endowed with a special, if blasphemous, insight.
And he certainly acts the part too, doesn't he? In his grand, almost self-appointed aspiration to Hellenize Ireland, to bring a new kind of pagan enlightenment to the country.
Precisely. Mulligan's audacious determination to Hellenize Ireland, to infuse Irish culture with the free-thinking, pagan, aesthetic, and carnal spirit of ancient Greece, in contrast to what he sees as stifling Catholic piety and narrow nationalism, arguably does make him a kind of prophet, albeit a wildly irreverent, anti-Christian, and deeply cynical one. This assumption is strongly supported by the way Telemachus dramatically presents him as a bearer of evangelical tidings, literally sweeping his mirror, a half circle in the air to flash the tidings abroad in sunlight, now radiant on the sea. It's a very theatrical, almost ritualistic gesture.
Yeah.
Bernard Benstock in James Joyce's Ulysses even argues provocatively that the book makes Mulligan a kind of John the Baptist to Stephen's Christ.
Really? John the Baptist?
In the very limited sense that he appears first, dramatically preparing the way for Stephen to emerge as a character shortly after. By this logic, Mulligan's crudely anti-Christian message, his mocking, liberating tidings, could perhaps be characterized as a proclamation of a good news that introduces Stephen's similar but much more complex and nuanced message of artistic rebellion and intellectual liberation. He is the loud, flamboyant herald.
And then there's yet another layer, a Roman mythology connection as well, further reinforcing this idea of him as a messenger figure.
Yes, Joyce just stacks these allusions. Later in the chapter, Mulligan, with typical self-aggrandizement, calls himself Mercurial Malachi, and the narrative refers to his Panama hat as a Mercury's hat, directly alluding to the famous winged hat of the Roman god Mercury. Since Mercury, the Romanized version of the Greek Hermes, was often represented as the god's swift messenger, carrying decrees down from Mount Olympus to human beings on Earth. This detail powerfully builds upon Mulligan's Hebrew name of Malachi. It reinforces his role as a swift, often capricious, and somewhat trickster-like messenger figure. He embodies speed, wit, and a certain slippery elusiveness, which perfectly fits his character, I think.
That's an astonishing amount of layers for one character's name alone. Irish history, Hebrew prophecy, Greek epic, Roman mythology. It's like a linguistic archaeological dig.
It truly is. And it's also a profound and rather touching tribute to Oliver St. John Gogarty, the real-life inspiration for Mulligan. Joyce was apparently paying tribute to a part of Gogarty's own fanciful personal mythology and self-perception. Gogarty wrote in his autobiography, "It isn't this time of year at all. Behold the wings upon my helmet and my unfettered feet. I can fly backwards and forwards in time and space."
Wow.
This embodies the very spirit of freedom, intellectual and temporal, that Joyce admired and incorporated into Mulligan's character. Mulligan, therefore, is not just a character. He's a walking, talking nexus of cultural, historical, and literary allusions, a testament to Joyce's dense intertextual artistry.
So, it's clear that names are rarely accidental in Ulysses. Joyce imbues them with layers of history, literature, symbolic function, inviting you to uncover these hidden meanings, much like an ancient riddle. It turns reading into a kind of detective work, doesn't it? A constant excavation of deeper significance. You realize that every single proper noun, every descriptive epithet is a carefully placed clue waiting to be deciphered, enriching your understanding of the characters and the world they inhabit. We've covered so much ground today, digging into these opening pages of Telemachus. We've seen Stephen's intense inner turmoil, haunted by the ghost of his dead mother, consumed by guilt. We've explored his outward presentation, defined by his unwavering adherence to mourning clothes, and we've analyzed how he is perceived by others, especially through Mulligan's teasing mummer taunt and his own loaded name. So when we bring these seemingly disparate elements together, what does this all mean for our understanding of Stephen and the novel as a whole? How does it all connect?
Well, synthesizing these insights really shows us the meticulously woven tapestry Joyce is creating right from the very beginning. The voice inside Stephen, as Frank Delaney's insightful podcast title so aptly puts it, is deeply, profoundly intertwined with his mother's death and his persistent sense of guilt. This internal torment, as we discussed, manifests quite literally and visually in his rigid adherence to black attire. It's an outward sign of an inward struggle that he cannot, or perhaps will not, shed. He carries his grief and guilt like a visible shroud.
And the Hamlet parallel ties into that external manifestation as well, deepening his tragic posture.
Exactly. The Hamlet parallel, also highlighted by Delaney, reinforces Stephen's role as an alienated, critical outsider, someone who stands apart from the prevailing mood of his world. His stubborn refusal of the great pants isn't just about a point of etiquette or fashion. It's a powerful statement of his unresolved grief, his intellectual and artistic sensibility, and his profound rejection of societal pressure to simply move on before he is ready. He is, in essence, putting on a conscious, albeit often solitary, performance of his grief for the world, but maybe primarily for himself, a defiant act of self-definition against conformity.
And Mulligan, for all his antagonism, his cruelty, his provocations, he also plays a crucial, almost catalytic role in illuminating Stephen's character, doesn't he? He's more than just a simple foil.
He absolutely is. Mulligan is both Stephen's antagonist and, in a strange, almost unconscious way, a prophetic figure. His constant teasing and mockery, while often cruel and designed to sting, forced Stephen to confront his reality, his own artistic identity, his relationship with the world. Mulligan embodies a playful, improvisatory, carnivalesque spirit that Stephen later, perhaps reluctantly, begins to tap into, especially in the wilder, more uninhibited chapters like Oxen of the Sun and Circe. Mulligan's mummer acts as a vibrant, irreverent foil to Stephen's intense intellectualism, but it's also, as we said, a premonition of Stephen's own latent comedic and performative abilities. It suggests a future evolution of his character that he might not initially recognize or embrace. Mulligan, in his own chaotic way, is sort of forcing Stephen towards a fuller, more complete expression of his artistic self.
And underlying all of this, the very fabric of the novel, is Joyce's absolute mastery of language, his obsessive attention to every single word.
Precisely. Joyce's repeated reworking of phrases like wax and rosewood isn't just an authorial quirk. It highlights his own dedication to language as a sacred tool, which is also Stephen's calling as a poet, as an artist of words. It shows how words themselves can carry immense psychological and symbolic weight, how a slight shift in cadence or a change of a single word can subtly alter the entire emotional and intellectual landscape of a passage. It's a masterclass in the power of precision, a lesson for Stephen and definitely for us as readers. If we connect this to the bigger picture, these early pages of Telemachus do so much more than just introduce characters and set a scene. They establish Stephen's intellectual and emotional burdens, his artistic struggles, his strained relationships. They set the stage for his complex journey throughout the entire novel. They show a young man grappling with tradition, with profound personal loss, and with the very nature of his identity in a world that often seems completely at odds with his internal landscape. They're really a miniature epic, full of foreboding and potential.
It's incredible how much depth and meaning Joyce packs into just these first few pages. From Stephen's haunting memories and profound grief, to the loaded symbolism of his clothes and Mulligan's complex, almost prophetic character. By scrutinizing these seemingly small details, a memory, a choice of clothing, a name, you gain a much deeper appreciation for the meticulous artistry of Joyce and the profound psychological depth of his characters. It shows how even the everyday, the mundane details of a single day in Dublin can be imbued with epic significance and universal human truth. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Ulysses.
And this deep dive into Stephen's character and the really charged atmosphere around him, it raises an important question maybe for you to consider. How much of our own identity is shaped not just by our conscious choices, but by the echoes of our past, the expectations of others, and even the subtle, unexamined traditions and symbolic garments we carry, sometimes without even realizing their profound weight.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep digging deeper into the stories that shape our world.